Was there a key moment in your mind that you're like, something has to change?
Oh, 100%. I had a really dear friend of mine. She said to me, Emma, you look really numb. You look like you're there, but you're not really there. And each and every time that I connected with that group, as much as I didn't want to at the time, every time I did, I always felt fulfilled and I always felt better. And I came back starting to really understand what community was all about. We are educating and building confidence and sharing positive stories around risk. And I can tell you that if I had listened to all the people who told me to play it safe, I certainly would not be in the financial position nor in this room today talking to you. Suddenly, the risk of not doing anything they start to learn is far greater than the risk of doing.
Have you ever looked back on a pivotal moment in life and thought, if only I'd known more back then? Today, we're speaking with someone who truly understands that reflection and has turned it into a movement. Emma Stevens, a passionate advocate for financial empowerment, shares her journey from corporate banking to founding SheInvests, a community designed to demystify finance for women and build lifelong confidence. From personal resilience to professional triumphs, Emma's story reminds us that knowledge isn't just power, it's protection, freedom, and opportunity. All right, let's get into it. Emma Stevens, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
What do you think the biggest hurdle is for women specifically getting into the financial markets or investing for themselves?
I think it's confidence and lack of education, not specifically to understanding investments specifically, but awareness around what's available to them and, at what point in their life should they, obviously seek more information from experts.
Guidance.
Absolutely,
and
guidance.
knowledge.
Yeah.
Do you find that that's the approach and we're generalizing, but do you think that their head in the sand sort of approach is still prevalent?
I don't think the head in the sand exists like it used to. So many years ago, as I was talking about before, a lot of people, when you'd asked to do a financial health check, people were head in the sand. But what's really exciting is more and more women are actively seeking and wanting to learn more and wanting to be financially independent. So I think it really comes down to a lack of confidence. And I think that comes back to childhood, money stories around, what their life was like growing up and what they knew about money or how their parents managed money. But secondary to that, it could be there's a story attached to an experience they've had once, which now has shame attached to it or guilt or just a general stigma.
Yeah, that's interesting because generally in society, there are obviously topics that we are preconditioned not to talk about openly. Politics, I guess, to a certain degree, but religion, sex, money, and the relationship with money, or to be able to openly discuss that, is probably getting more, is developing. It's a different landscape than it was
Definitely.
when these people were in their childhood,
Yeah.
in their adolescence even.
Yeah.
And maybe that's also a generational thing, as obviously as well, because our parents were brought up in an environment where their parents, post-war, definitely weren't involving the kids with education around finance and being financially secure growing up and the decisions that they make.
Yeah.
How is it that we can be a circuit breaker and be more available to be open to discuss all things finance?
I think specifically to women, I think a lot of women relate to things differently than men. I think even from talking about a podcast or, a channel where people are going to learn about finance, men might be attracted to the numbers and the graphs and the statistics and the markets as, what's going on. And, that's how men learn. I think women really learn through stories and being able to relate to things.
Connection.
And I think it's the old saying, you can't be what you can't see. So I think the ability to, talk about certain situations, case studies, examples where women may relate to being in a similar position to that and understanding what it is that person did that was right or the thing that they learned was actually a mistake, I think, is a way that women can connect to and be able to see it in their own personal circumstance.
Let's take back. It's so obvious to me how passionate you are with helping women, I guess, demystify and to give them the confidence and education in investing. And you've started this movement in this community called SheInvests through your business, Flint. But take me back in terms of, and you've had a number of decades in the financial system, but it would appear that for me that you were always still so passionate about education for women,
Mm-hmm.
but then you yourself were put into this vulnerable place of uncertainty, which I guess it must have been such a pivotal moment in your journey to open your eyes of saying, well, even with all this information I've worked at the bank for 20 years, I'm now in this really challenging place in my life where I do feel really uncertain and I don't know what to do. And that seems, from what you've told me, that a really important catalyst to spark this next part of your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to go back to, being in the bank and, being around finance and, I guess taking action on the recommendations that were made to me or that, through watching other people's success. So me making decisions and taking risks, through buying property and making sure that I had a financial planner and superannuation reviewed and, protection in place. All of those things gave me options later on in life when uncertainty built in to my particular, unexpected life event. What became real for me was because I had put those, call it, protections in place when I was in that vulnerable situation and when it's in that uncertain time, it certainly made me be far more compassionate and understanding around now knowing what other people were going through when I was, on the other side of the counter, not being able to understand why people do what they do or letting, manipulation and abuse and things, take control. But, through being able to come through that difficult time and looking back on the reasons that made me come out the other end in in a better light, made me realise that if I hadn't have had those, those pillars set up to begin with, I would have been in a far different financial circumstance and probably stuck.
In that environment where you're at home, you've got 2 young kids and you're on maternity leave, and essentially, as you've described it to me, that, your marriage is a lot of challenges in that environment. How vulnerable are you feeling and what are you holding on to on a daily basis to be able to think at some point this will get better?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So holding on to, for me, holding on to was my mental health. Knowing that I was okay because I, ultimately had assets. I knew that I had options in the future, but none of that really mattered if my mental health wasn't okay. So, the number one thing that I recognised in that time was, and what I watch a lot of people go through, certainly, when you're vulnerable, is your energy goes out into places that normally you wouldn't do, but you're doing it out of desperation or out of fear or out of survival. And, noticing that in myself, I then started to realise that, my mental health was starting to slip. And the number one thing that I had to do was ensure that, I was taking care of myself and I was making sure that, I was well enough to take care of my children.
Was there a key moment in your mind that you're like, something has to change?
Oh, 100%. I had a really dear friend of mine who I worked with in the bank as well. We both had our babies at the same time. You know, she was the friend I would call to come and pick up my daughter from the childcare centre if I was late back at work. She said to me, Emma, you know, and I'm such a happy, positive person most of the time. She said, Emma, you look really numb. Like you look like you're there, but you're not really there. And I really was in that point in time. And I was reading about this the other day. I was really in an out-of-body experience because I was so, I guess, traumatized by what was unraveling that I just didn't understand. I was really confused. And, you know, as a protection, I guess from a protection point of view, I was having these moments where I was dissociated from what was going on because that was how I was protecting myself, not to feel the full impact of what was actually going on.
You were there, but you weren't there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was in that very moment that I had realised that I wasn't being present. I was totally not present. And it was in that moment that I decided to connect with someone who I knew was going to be able to help me, you know, get back to where I needed to be.
Yeah. Wow. I can really relate to that numbness as well. And that's a testament to you. But I think also, even though the world was sort of coming in onto you and you were feeling that sort of, I guess, those traits of sadness or of vulnerability, did you always think that, because that was so situational, those feelings and those emotions, it's a period of your life, wasn't chronic. Did you think that at some point you would get back to, you know, where you were before?
Yeah. No, I definitely knew that I would get back. It was a matter of how I wanted to get back and what life was going to look like for me when I got back. And that very much became the journey of, you know, SheInvests and my purpose. I think you look back and, you know, people talk about, you know, business and purpose. You've got to find purpose and then that will be what drives your business. And if you're talking to someone in their 20s who's just having a good time going out and having fun and then telling them about purpose, it probably doesn't mean anything. I do truly think you have to go through stuff and experience things and come up against challenges in which there are barriers that, you know, that need to be torn down. And for me, it wasn't a matter of about getting through it and then just going back to the way life was. It was actually redefining what life needed to look like moving forward.
Yeah,
and
I love that.
Yeah.
And I think also that there's this sort of psychological analogy where, you know, the clouds are grey, and in your mind, or the lens that you look out of, and you know you can't see the sun, but you've seen the sun before, and you know that they're behind the clouds. The problem is if you don't believe the sun's there anymore. But if it's situational, then you sort of don't lose hope. We don't lose sight of the fact that there's sun behind those clouds. And to your point, it's not just to go back to the sun that was, but to believe and to be able to create a much brighter sun and a much brighter day through that experience.
Absolutely. I was listening to an incredible woman talk about, you know, once you're finally presented with something that means that, you know, life may not go on, you start to stop and think about things in a real different way around how you've been living. And, you know, it's the old saying, human being, you know, human doing. I think up until that point in life, I'd been doing a lot of doing. And I guess in that moment when my friend had said to me, you know, Emma, you look numb, you know, I realised in that moment how much I was lacking in being present. And that really was that defining moment of going, well, do I want to go back to doing, or do I actually want to, you know, start really living and being present and actually, you know, controlling the things that, you know, if I want something, I'm the person who has to make that happen. I can't be stuck in a victim story where it is what it is, because that's the way it is.
Hey guys, just popping in with a gentle reminder. If you're enjoying this episode, we'd love it if you'd give it a like, hit subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. It's free and it really helps us grow and continue to share these stories that matter. Cheers. I think it's such an incredible, experience, because you've got someone who has decades of experience in the finance, in the banking system. So it wouldn't be, you're so knowledgeable, yet in the environment where it's so unexpected and you're in this, real shitty place of your life, you're still having all the same emotions as someone who doesn't even have that knowledge. And so now this passion then burns inside of you to go, there is a place for me to inspire, to be the thought leader, to be the person to provide this knowledge in a really safe place, but a really inspiring place for women to be able to get ahead and to, I guess, to your point, set things in their life so that in a way that protects them in case the rug gets pulled underneath them again.
Yeah.
But also to give them that confidence to go after and to find that brighter day, that brighter sun, just notwithstanding the fact that the clouds have been there, but to go, I'm here, we are here as a community. So talk to me now about SheInvests and what that looks like and why that is so important and that seems to be your passion.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with, as you said, community. So in those dark days and during that time where I was, navigating through the cloudy days, an ultimate thing that most people will feel in, times of depression or, burnout is you actually withdraw, you isolate, you pull back. You don't want to be around people, you couldn't think of anything worse. But the one thing that I leaned into was being part of a community group. It was my wellbeing group with the person, Kelly, that I was doing the coaching with. And each and every time that I connected with that group, as much as I didn't want to at the time, every time I did, I always felt fulfilled and I always felt better. And I came back starting to really understand what community was all about. It took me to be, 31 years, in this life where, as much as I'm a people person before then, and there was communities that I was involved in, it didn't really mean what it meant to me then. And what the importance of, I think more and more people were moving away from community at that point in time. Everyone's just like in their lives, just, charging through the days, just smashing out hours and all about their business and their work and their own little insular life, that people just started to lose that, connection to, community. So for me, one of the biggest things that helped me through that time was that community. And then obviously the SheInvests was, well, there's so much knowledge and experience that I have that, it's the basis of why wouldn't people want to join that community, to be able to lean into that knowledge and have people build, confidence around understanding these things and feeling like they're in a safe place and that they can be guided. So there's lots of other communities out there doing amazing things. And I'm like, but the finance community is like, isn't that the most powerful one of all? Because that is the ultimate thing that can either make people move forward in life or not. And it's the ultimate thing that I think if people don't have in order is what's going to keep them from, I guess, being able to overcome the dark clouds.
And so this is, in your mind, what's the highest and best use of the community of SheInvests? Nationwide support and community.
Yep, nationwide support and community. So, all coming together with a common goal, which is to understand more around financial wellbeing. And obviously in my Flint business, that's, guiding women through buying property. But ultimately, to get to a position of being able to buy property, you've got to start somewhere. And the basics are, getting your ducks in a row and then understanding that even though if you're buying a property, you still need to protect you and that property. So all the other things that come, all the other experts and specialists that come with being part of that entire process. So, yeah, for me, being surrounded by so many women in business, being able to leverage around, how do we get in and understand people in business and how they've grown their business and what they've done? How can we then, take those stories and share them with other people so that they can learn from other people's journeys, mistakes, things that they wish they had have done differently, things that they, you have to ultimately make some mistakes to learn, Because
you can, and it's not, you don't have to be I guess, struggling financially or in low socioeconomic positions to be naively unaware of the finance game or investments, and your story about, and I think there's a stigma to that, to go, I don't know what I don't know. It's simple as I don't know what interest rate is for my home loan, or like you said earlier, off air, I don't know what my superannuation, who has it, what its return is, what are the fees, what is it, how is it diversified? Talk to me about that experience where you had the event with these really well-known business women who were in that place of vulnerability and sharing to say, I don't know, I'm very good at what I do in my business, and obviously the business performs well on a net profit level. But what I'm doing with that profit or with that excess money, or even if it's a good wage or your excess take home, you know, the amount you're saving, I don't know what I should be doing with this, because they put their hand up and say, I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's out of sight, out of mind. I'm not on fire right now, so I don't need a bucket of water to chuck on me. It's very much, we're attracted to doing the things that we love. So, we love our business. That's, our passion. So we're in it all the time, and we're not, prioritizing the other things that are important. And sometimes we don't prioritize it, we're just simply time poor. But other times we don't prioritize it because we don't truly understand what we need to know. We don't know what we don't know. And I think the biggest journey over the last decade, especially with all the information and insights and community groups that are coming out around the financial well-being, is when you actually start to look at the numbers around, had you known that you sat down and reviewed this and made a few changes, what that would have meant to you financially in 20 years' time or 30 years' time versus not doing anything at all. It's a huge alarming number, or, risk of, not being, being in that situation to protect your assets or, yourself, your income, your family.
We discussed off air about my evolving level of risk tolerance, or my relationship with risk. And a lot of, I think, anyone's risk tolerance or in an environment is a lack of knowledge.
Totally.
So you could, if you're not in it, you could see from arm's length someone do something with, whether it's a business, whether it's buying property, whether it's buying shares, whatever you want to do in terms of investment. And you would, without their knowledge, that would look risky. So that exercise for you, with you're sitting there without any knowledge, is a 9 out of 10 risk. Wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
But the person in it has done an exorbitant amount of research, understanding, and it might only be a 5 out of 10 risk or 4 out of 10 risk process for them because of how knowledgeable they are to that set of circumstances. So do you think that, or have you seen that with women specifically, if they are, obviously if they don't have the knowledge, they're going to be more risk adverse?
Absolutely.
But if they do have the knowledge, does that risk tolerance or the risk analysis of that, I guess, leap, they're more likely to take it?
Yep, absolutely. And that is 100% why SheInvests exists. It's because we are educating and building confidence and sharing, positive stories around, risk. And starting at the beginning where somebody doesn't have that knowledge or that understanding, or they haven't been through the journey, the risk tolerance is going to be, they're not taking any risks. But the beauty of being able to take them through a journey and start to provide the education and the information and the research and align them with different experts who can also, inform them, all of a sudden it's not such a risk anymore. They still, ultimately end up activating and moving through with, transacting or buying a property or whatever that is. But suddenly the risk of not doing anything they start to learn is far greater than the risk of doing. And certainly property, I think most people would agree, in Australia has been, definitely a risk, that more people have been willing to take, because for the most part, property has gone up. And so, I think over time, if it hasn't worked out, people have been able to sell and still had money at the end. with risk, like you said, it's a lack of knowledge. There can be people who have knowledge in areas and still take risks, but I think for me, the SheInvest model is around addressing why people don't want to do something. They've got an interest, they know a little bit, they are in a financial position too, potentially, but they're too scared to take that risk. And it just comes back to the education, the process, removing the stigma, all those other things that come up. It's not just necessarily about what they're buying and taking a risk. It comes back to addressing all the fears that they have inside. It's like addressing the stuff that they might be worried about personally.
And that comes back to, it's all that piece is all the environment that you are in, and the environment as your childhood, as we touched on, but also if you are centered around people who are not investors, have a really high, they're so risk adverse, whether it be your parents, whether it be your siblings, whether it be, and then this whole stigma of, oh, I've got an investment property, for instance, and then no one in your circle of people do, then it's going to be uncomfortable for you to have that conversation. A, because you don't want to be seen to be getting ahead or further than them, and maybe potentially, hopefully not is the case. Hopefully they're very supportive of that, but they may cast judgment on that because they're not doing it. So I found so I think SheInvest community then plays an incredible role because you are just going into like-minded people and people who are well advanced in that journey than you are. And I guess the personal antidote there for me is like, I would suggest a lot of my family have been risk adverse, entrepreneurial, risk adverse. And the more people that you surround yourself who are that way inclined, the more challenging it is for your psyche to get your head around the idea of laying it all on the line financially for a new business. And so before we started the firm, I had to sit with, I actively chose to surround myself with people who are decades ahead of me, and to understand that I wanted to be I wanted to create financial stability for my family, and that was really important for me whilst doing the things that I was doing in sport. Big goal, huge team, incredible team, high performing. That really fulfilled me. But speaking with these people, they were talking numbers that I couldn't believe on the upside of a high performing company, but also at the same time talking to them about, well, what's at risk here? And almost always everything is at risk, right? There's not many people who are that well protected in business that if the business failed, they could just hand back the keys tomorrow and it would be, you shrug your shoulders and do something else. So it was very obvious to me that whilst they were able to control the business, they can control to a certain degree, it's up to them to make it work. It's up to them to continue that journey for them. But my goodness, they looked at risk as necessary, or the downside of risk necessary and okay. And for them, when they retired and sold, or they retired and got bought out, that's when they could sign off and say, well, I'm no longer at risk. But until that point, you can't have one without the other.
Absolutely.
And so I found that the more I surrounded myself, and it wasn't just in one industry, and it wasn't just the same level of success. It was, I made sure that I was, really varying my sample size of people, but of mentors or, people that I could talk to about it. But by normalizing the process was, I would say, fundamentally, and being in a community of such where it was normal and supported and celebrated that process, then my thoughts changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
That my actions changed. My view of risk changed to the point where, starting a business, investing in property, you don't know. You're always going in property. You're always going to be buying what you think is expensive, but it's only only after time do you reflect and go, that wasn't that expensive. And then the risk of, of all the things that could happen, you all of a sudden go, yeah, that's fine because I need that. That's a necessity to have to be able to be exposed to the upside.
Yep.
But for me, fundamentally, that it is that community piece which you're tapping into with SheInvests, like surrounding yourself with those people and making that the norm changes like the synapses in your brain almost to go, yeah, okay, this is the normal, not what I've previously learned for the last 45 years.
Yeah.
This is the new normal and it's celebrated.
Yeah, absolutely. You've absolutely nailed it. Normalizing it is, one of the first keys to what will make SheInvest successful. But you were talking about community and, being in rooms with other people and hearing their growth journeys, their success. In the early days when I was planning out, what wasn't called SheInvest, I called it M-Invest. As I was planning this out almost 10 years ago, I was listening to podcasts. I was reading, Women's Agenda. I was in deep research mode. And so, I would never have likened myself to be an entrepreneur. I was an employee for life in a corporate, trying to climb the ladder. But as I started to listen to these stories, and there's one person in particular who presented at that event that I was telling you about that I was at with all those women, and I landed a podcast and she was being interviewed. And I became a bit of a stalker. I then started to follow her journey. And what I started to realize through hearing all these women's in business journeys was they were all very similar, from where they started out to the mistakes they made to all the times that they wanted to give up to, to putting themselves on the line and backing themselves and ultimately risking themselves. And it was a common theme amongst every single podcast that I listened to or article that I read. It was a community, their community of people that on those dark days where they wanted to, exit and give up, it was that community of people around them holding space for them and, encouraging them to, to hang tight and, hold on. And I think in life, whether it be buying a property or starting a business or doing anything, we've got a lot of people out there who play it safe. And I can tell you that if I had listened to all the people who told me to play it safe back when I had returned from maternity leave and was back at the bank, I certainly would not be in the financial position, nor in this, in this room today talking to you. Because, that set of complacency and being very conservative and playing it safe kind of just, I respect people who truly that's who they are and that's where they stand. But if my community was just that community and I hadn't joined these groups and listened to these podcasts and learned and got inside the rooms of other people that I would never otherwise have any connection to, I wouldn't be here because I've learned through their stories. And this is exactly what you're saying about the education piece and the learning is community. And, and building a community based off those types of learnings helps other people to realise that, hang on a minute, actually, like you said, the uptick, yep, you're in there, it's hard, and there's a lot of times that you want to give up, but, hanging in there with the right people and the right, investment, the uptick is going to be, significant. With, of course, not denying the fact that at any point there's still a risk.
Of course, but also the risk that people that would quote unquote be risk adverse, there's a risk of inaction.
Yeah.
And that is harrowing for now. For both of us, I guess, we've opened the door of our former lives of being like that. The risk of inaction is harrowing and not opening the door and not walking through and seeing where that goes. And it's not to suggest that there's going to be things when you educate yourself, when you embrace that opportunity to be in that community, to understand and learn, doesn't mean that everything will float your boat and everything will be a green light. You'll be like, no, that's still too risky for me. But it's that being vulnerable enough to go, all right, I don't know anything about that. So I'm going to learn everything and then make an educated decision based on what I believe is to be true for me. And that might, Cheryl might put everything into crypto. That's fine. Or Bob might put everything into the property at Noosa or whatever. But what's good for me is I'll know, but I need to be educated. And I want to surround myself with people who aren't limited to their view of life.
Well, it's the ability to be open and the curiosity. And, you probably will stuff up. And sometimes the only way to learn is to make the mistake, right? And to learn from it. But it's the ability to remain curious.
Hey guys, before we keep going, a quick reminder, if something in today's chat has landed with you, please like the episode, subscribe to the show, and share your thoughts in the comments. It helps us more than you know, and it means we can keep inviting voices that inspire. All right, let's get back into it. So, and what's the first step then? What can people who are sitting there listening going, I don't know a lot. I'm inspired by this chat, by what you represent, your story. What can I do to learn more, to find this community?
Well, I'd definitely say have a conversation with me because I think a lot of people, as I say, don't know what you don't know. So I think, one of the most important things that you ask somebody when they come in for anything is understanding what are your goals? What is it that you want, whether it be now, 1 year to 2 years, or
that's the process
5
first.
years to 10 years. I think, ultimately you've got to understand what is your goal? What do you want to achieve? Personal, professional, and then it's being able to understand, well, what is your current circumstance? What does that look like? And, there's going to be, someone who's starting out on their journey in their early 20s, and there's going to be people who are, getting married and having babies in their 30s, and ultimately, sadly, there's going to be people getting divorced in their 40s and so on. So I think everyone's, what can I do from a financial standpoint is going to be really different. But I think ultimately it's surrounding yourself by people that you can relate to. And as I said, in a community where there's no point putting someone over here whose life is completely different to the person over there. What are you going to learn? There's not much. You will, I guess, be mindful of that in the future. But I think it's about putting yourself in a room where you actually just don't know what you don't know. And then when people start to talk about the successes they've had and the things that they've learned or what they've tried or what, that then starts to spark a bit of an idea around, okay, well, perhaps there's something here that I can go away and look at. And, then there's the conversation to, okay, then where to from here? Who do I need to speak to? What do I need to go away and do? They're the starting points.
Are there any key commonalities between the varying stages of life in terms of habits or philosophies or thoughts to get ahead?
Commonality would be, like you said, what's the risk of inaction? So I think not doing anything is a commonality across the board. So whether it be a young person who might have a goal to want to buy a property but think they're so far away from doing it, so they do nothing. But if they had have met someone like me who would just encourage them to come in and sit down and just find out, all of a sudden they might be 6 months into their journey of buying a house, or maybe 2 years as opposed to 10 years away.
Flip side, what's the commonality with the successful, with the people who are on the path? Is it the curiosity? Thirst for knowledge?
I think definitely the curiosity, but I also think the doers, the people who just take action, the people who are confident. I think there's a lot of really intelligent people out there who are financially stable, who stay there because they don't take the risk. They don't take the action. They play it safe.
Yeah.
And so the people who are on the upside who have been really successful, absolutely, the curiosity, the boredom, the ideas around watching what other people are doing and being, intrigued by how that person's been able to go over there and build this business from whatever. I think it's definitely, being able to look outside yourself and see what success looks like to somebody else and how they've been able to achieve that.
Yeah, and to be it comes back to that community piece of learning how someone has done that and seeing that seeing yourself in that journey and seeing, because I think a lot of the people who are in that, the non-achievers, I guess, if you want to call it, who are happy or otherwise agreeable to the inaction, maybe don't have a connection piece between the people that are otherwise in quote unquote successful with finances and investments, because they go, well, they're not me. They've were born into it, or they made better. That was 10 years ago. You know, I could have bought a property 10 years ago and would have doubled in value, but I didn't. But I'm not going to do anything now still.
Yeah.
You know, so it's quite a jaded position, or it must be quite confronting. And maybe that is a big hurdle, because to lean in and to say that person was just like me, had exactly the same circumstance, exactly the same decision making, or very similar to all of that, and they've made a different decision to me and are much better for it. I have to take personal responsibility for that, and not to say that I've let myself down because I was because of the inaction, but to be inspired by what the future could look like by taking action. And I think that's a real critical junction in someone's mindset to go, you know, I missed out, but yesterday I should, you know, yesterday I should have taken action. So let's go. Let's do that now.
Yeah.
For my future self.
Yeah. I definitely think for people who are successful, have got a lot of losses over their time. I think it's that there's a lot of people who are happy, perhaps not being curious or not really, you know, looking outside and dreaming of things that, you know, that they can go off and do and achieve. I think the people like myself and the people that I surround myself with, we're ideas people. We get ideas and we get excited by them. And I think the idea and the curiosity and the drive to wanting to achieve that is what puts us on the upscale of actually taking action versus a person who, you know, maybe just doesn't, you know, there's a lot of people who just don't have that certain level of curiosity. It's just not the same for them. They're happy with whatever's going on. And I think that's the difference between, you know, someone who takes on a lot of risk and somebody who takes on a very diverse and conservative amount of risk. But I think by trying to create a community where there's so many different elements to financial wellness, is that, you know, again, if you're that person who's maybe not going to go off and, you know, want to be, you know, the next biggest entrepreneur or property, you know, investor or whatever, but you still want to just know enough to know that if shit happens tomorrow, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to have something that, you know, I'm going to fall back on and I can rebuild from, rather than be in a destitute situation where there's no coming, not that there's no coming back from, but alarmingly, there's a huge number of people, sadly, women in their 60s and 70s and even 80s, that are couch surfing and, you know, living house sitting and, you know, living in cars because, you know, these weren't women who were going off to start businesses and be big investors, but they are the women who just could have known the basics and had things set up properly so that they were protected should something bad happen. And I think, you know, whilst I talk the success around wanting to empower women and build wealth through property and get people set up and, you know, create, a significant life for themselves through property. On the flip side, it's not even about that. It's just about making sure that people are aligned with the right people to guide them to make sure that no matter what, if something does go wrong, you're going to be okay. And that to me is really that bigger piece around that, you know, that financial wellbeing and financial security, safe space of, you know, getting more and more people who may not be, you know, curious or motivated or inspired to take, you know, the first option.
Set themselves up.
But to set themselves up. I think a lot of that passion in the early days when I was building out this idea, I had, and this is that conversation piece where a lot has changed. I think I had a conversation last night with another mother whose son's my daughter's age, and he knows more about politics than I do. Like, he is so switched on, and we're talking about all these conversations that children are having. And again, it was a stigma for us when we were younger. We didn't talk about it. People didn't ask about who you voted for, and it was rude and all of those sorts of things, right? So now our children are talking about it and it's becoming more of the norm. Same thing with the financial conversation. So I think, 15, 20 years ago, women weren't sitting in a room learning about what they could be doing, whereas now they are. But I looked at the aftermath of these women where things hadn't been set up and looked at, imagine if that was done or that was done or, imagine that circumstance would have been far different to what it is today. And, obviously from a legal point of view, a big conversation into all of that really comes down to, making sure you've got, appropriate wills and financial agreements, all of those things. Because some people walk away with money, but if they don't know how to manage it or if they haven't protected themselves, very quickly it's gone. And so, it's not always about just going out and, building a property portfolio or being a millionaire tomorrow. It's just about making sure that, you've had the right guidance and trusted advisors around you to ensure that you're going to be...
If the rug gets pulled underneath you, you're going to be all right.
Yeah. And so I certainly feel very excited about this new wave of movement because everyone I'm speaking to today, more and more women, are really excited, really independent, really inspired. I'm blown away at the money that some people have saved that come and see me. It's incredible, absolutely incredible. And yet, 15 years ago, it was buried head in the sand. There were very few.
Sure.
There were very few. And, like I said, it was just, normalising the conversation and creating safe space where people felt comfortable, where they could come in and be in a room where, they had no idea what to ask or what they were going to learn. But, through watching other people and hearing their stories, slowly, bit by bit, they're becoming more acquainted and comfortable with, where they can possibly grow to in the future.
Well, SheInvests has all the potential and already what you're doing now, but certainly where it's headed. Looking forward to seeing it just prosper and provide that support that is so necessary in this space. So hats off to you.
Thank you.
Now, before you go, the 5 questions that we ask. Number 1, what does success mean to you?
Success to me means presence in the day. So with my children, having enough time to get up and be, available mentally in a space where my brain's not off worrying about all these other things. For me, taking them to the beach and going surfing, being able to incorporate that, regularly in a week. So, success, happiness, I think they both go hand in hand.
Well, what does happiness mean to you?
Well, the happiness is
the success.
Is the success of that. For me, the number one thing I kept coming back to, which is why I could have pulled away altogether. And there were certainly many times last year and even in the last, 6 months where I could have pulled away altogether, but I kept coming back to what makes me happy. And for me, happiness will truly be seeing the change that needs to happen.
Love that. What's your normal morning routine look like?
It's changed a little bit over the last few years, but automatically in the early days, I had the alarm set for 4:45 a.m., which meant that I'd have a little bit of me time before Xavier, back when he was a baby, he would wake up. I used to be, the victim. I never got time. It's, So 4:45 was the clock of waking up. And
what's it now?
Around about 5:15.
Okay.
Wake up, coffee, yoga mat. It changes. It just depends on where I'm at. So get on the floor, do some stretches, Pilates. If I get freedom to go for a surf, go for a surf. I'd love my future to be every day doing that with the kids in the water. Let's go surfing every day. That's what I aspire to. But in my challenging moments, it's meditation.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of meditation. I started my day with a lot of meditation every day just to get myself centered into a place of keeping
presence.
Yeah, 100%.
What was the biggest lesson you've learned in your life? Or you'd tell your former self, your younger self?
It's so cliche, but it really is.
That's
you
okay.
Trust your gut.
Yeah.
Your instincts are your true source.
And finally, one guest you would think we should interview next on the show?
So,
Better have a good story.
yes. Look, there's two people that came to mind. And this is, me who's been inspired, and also in service of I wouldn't be if it wasn't for.
Mm.
So there's two people. One will be Kelly Carthy that I was telling you about, who was my coach,
Mhm.
who in herself has led, she's had an incredible journey that I think a lot of people, some may know, some may not, but I think from a wellness point of view and from a inner leader point of view is just doing incredible stuff in that space. But, when I think about people who work really, really hard and it's amazing what they're able to achieve, that's definitely Kelly. So that's one. But the other person who I'm in absolute awe of, her name's Cassie Miller. Cassie was diagnosed a few years ago, 23, with an incurable cancer. And she's just recently launched She Believes. And she's on a journey to be curable. And she's a mother of 3 beautiful little children. And just watching her, I'm just I think about, my journey and what I've been through. And now I'm looking at what she's faced with and her challenges and what she's achieving right now and what she's doing for women everywhere. I think it's just absolutely inspiring. Wow. So I attended an event earlier this year, She Believes, Dare to Live, and it was just, the women that she brought in the room was just incredible. So I think, it's all about mindset and perspective. And as I was saying before, when we talk about, we're going through life and we're just doing, or we're all afraid of dying one day. But, if you knew that you were going to perhaps not be here in 12 months' time, how do you choose to start living your life?
Sure.
And I think drawing in her, her perception and insights and experiences in that space is enough to make anyone realise, why am I worrying about this, or why am I, yeah. So
Great suggestions.
Thank you.
Emma Stevens, you are a force, and I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
And
thank you, Richard, for the opportunity.
Looking forward to seeing where SheInvests goes, because, it's going to be amazing.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
That was another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. Next time you're reviewing your mortgage, turn to the person next to you and tell them all about the show. It means the world to us. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, we'd love you to like, comment, or leave a rating. It really helps us continue to bring these meaningful stories to life and reach more people just like you. All right, until next time, peace.